All right. Well, welcome to the Connect or Die podcast, everybody.
It's always the clap.
Do the clap.
It's a good place to start. With the clap.
Well, plus then if you're looking at the recording, the clap sticks out.
Yeah.
So today we want to thank Bundaberg.
Is it Bundaberg or
Bundaberg? Bundaberg.
Bundaberg.
It's Australian. Ginger beer. It's Australian.
Bundaberg.
Wonderful soda that doesn't sponsor our podcast, but we just really like them.
It's just it's just a drink that goes down easy and makes you feel good.
So smooth. We should make it.
When I'm looking to connect, I reach for Bundaberg. Bundaberg.
We should do this on every podcast.
Just have a different product.
Until they start suing us.
When I want to connect with people and have whiter teeth, I reach for Colgate.
Yeah. That'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So, today we are having my brother, Joe. He's going to be a part of our podcast today. He's a pretty cool guy. I've known him my whole life, believe it or not. I remember from the very beginning. The reason we brought my brother on, obviously he's got a lot of good perspectives. I think we're going to have a really good conversation. But also, he climbed 2 of the 7 highest peaks. Because if you've ever heard of 7 peaks, right? The 7 peaks are the 7 continents and the highest peaks on them. He climbed 2 of them in 1 year, which is pretty cool. So we're going to talk about his training, what he did in order to prepare and to really to be able to go and do something like that. So I'm excited. I'm excited to talk to him about it. I think it's going to be cool.
Sounds good.
So let's just start. I mean, I just wanted to. My first question was, what's the motivation to climb these tall mountains?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we grew up climbing a lot of mountains around here, Timpanogos, Kings Peak, all around Utah. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, it's just fun, But the main reason I wanted to climb Aconcagua was because it was the biggest mountain I could find that was, accessible.
Yeah.
So, you look at some of these other places, even going up to Alaska or any, in North America or even going out in Himalayas or going out east, those mountains were big, but actually Aconcagua was the tallest outside the Himalayan mountain range.
Really?
Yeah. Plus, it was pretty cheap. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the tallest, and cheapest, most accessible.
Yeah. If someone is interested in climbing it, about how much? What are the costs if you don't?
Oh yeah. Between a guide, food the whole time, they pick you up from the airport, they give you a hotel, you go up with them, they provide food the whole time. It was actually amazing. Yeah, it was really cool. They make all these amazing dishes, and so you don't actually have to worry about food. You do have to pack your gear. Now they actually porter in your gear to base camp, which is 15,000 feet, and then you have to shuttle your gear up the mountain. Mm-hmm. Because actually that's part of the acclimation process is going up and coming back down. You hike high, sleep low type deal.
Yeah.
But that whole trip though, I think it ran around 6,000 for the whole thing.
Wow.
And that was 3 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah. And I'll tell you what, the people down there are so accommodating. It's so amazing. The culture is really, really hospitable and.
Give us an example of if you have any stories of that because we're going to talk. Also, you went and climbed Kilimanjaro, and that was a very different experience.
Very different experience.
So I kind of want to get into the culture and what did you connect with that culture? What did you like about it?
Well, everybody there, it's very family-centered, which I think we can relate to. We grew up, we're family, we love doing things together, a lot of things outdoors, just a lot of bonding time, And they have that same type of deal, right? Now, they don't have a lot down there, but they're very giving. They give all they can, which is really unique because, they don't have a lot, but they always share. It's just a very, that's just part of the culture. I mean, that's from what I saw, there in Argentina. It's just part of their culture. It's just being able to be giving and sharing people who are just community-oriented.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and so, I mean, in my mind, it's what is it that possesses a person to be look, there's the highest peak, and I want to go climb it? Because I think a lot of people, whether it's physical things in life or actual, maybe emotional things, we tend to avoid the things that are clearly hard and that clearly are a challenge or that are going to put us outside of our comfort zone. So just kind of get me in terms of like your mindset, like where you're just like, there's that tall peak and I'm going there, I'm going there.
Yeah, well, I guess it wouldn't really be it wouldn't be as much outside of my comfort zone. It's like something that would kind of, I mean, it is to an extent because you're going somewhere new people, new place, everything like that. But, just hiking a mountain, that's something very familiar to me.
Okay.
So it's kind of combining a little of the two, right? It's like kind of going outside my comfort zone while being able to have something familiar. It's a completely new place, but,
for sure.
Walking that trail and, doing those steps is something I'm used to.
Yeah. So what are the training for that climb? What did that look like?
Actually, I hadn't even thought about the training for a long time, but it was actually a little more intense. We'd get these, because it was me and my dad who hiked it together. Mm-hmm. Now, his was more of a feat than mine, because, I'm young, and he was 63, and hiking that.
Yeah.
Crazy, but, either way, though, we'd wear these masks, and essentially they just restrict your oxygen. So you just go 3 to 4 times a week, and you throw this mask on that just feels like you're breathing through a straw just to strengthen your lungs, and then just run trails.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just try to get my time up to where I'm running trails almost as fast as I normally would, but with
less oxygen.
Yeah, with a lot less oxygen.
Dang.
Yeah. So one of my goals would be like I could kind of have slack on the way down, but I would crank up the mask and I would just keep it cranked all the way to the top of whatever I was hiking that day. So I just drive up to the trail in the morning, hop out of my car, throw my mask on, and I push all the way to the top toward like just pushing myself, and then be able to have a chance to breathe and then kind of take the time on the way down.
So it's just like part of the Swenson family legacy to just do like crazy crap that other people look at and are like.
Well, we did. Yeah. We grew up river rafting. I think we went to Disneyland a few times, but for the most part, it was river rafting. It was hiking. It was climbing. It was
horseback riding. That's all we did. Camping.
That's what we did for fun.
Yeah.
So always testing it physically. And
Never seemed like that though, did it?
Yeah, no, it just seemed like it was
fun.
Normal.
That was just fun. That's what we did.
I still remember I went to what is that called? Is it Rattlesnake Rapids? Is that what it's called at Disneyland? I can't remember. But we went down and I was so disappointed. And then I got on. I was probably like 12. I was probably like 12 at the time, and then we got on a roller coaster, and I was so disappointed. And then we went to this next thing, and I'm like, this sucks. Like, this isn't enjoyable.
Yeah.
I think just because some of the situations that we grew up in were so unique, but you don't know that as a kid. As a kid, you just think it is. Yeah, that's just what it is, and so. But one thing I am interested, Joe, with your training and everything that you went out there, what do you feel like you learned the most on Aconcagua? Like when you were spending your time there, that's 3 weeks. That's like months of preparation. What do you feel like? What's like if you could say like, I learned 1 or 2 things. What do you think those would be?
Well, I don't know. Off the top of my head, I would say that on the way up, I was actually feeling really good. Like, to be honest, you kind of hike the mountain before you ever hike the mountain, right? You put in hours and hours and hours, so essentially you've already hiked it so many times before you even show up that hiking is just like the fun part. You know what I mean? Like, you've already got all the grime out of the way. All you have to do now is just to enjoy the ride.
Yeah.
Is kind of how it worked out for me, at least. So on that way up the mountain, I remember that, because I was feeling really good, just being in the shape I am, and I remember our dad, he was, being a little older, and plus he had broken 7 ribs a couple years ago, and his lungs were more constricted. So I remember taking the time to go up, and I remember how it wasn't as important to me to reach the summit. It was like I was already there. It was already an accomplishment in my eyes. So I just had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was like the main thing that I realized was that the summit wasn't as vital as having that experience with someone I cared about.
Right.
Right. So.
Right.
I think it's a powerful principle, and it definitely has applications outside of that. The idea of enjoying the journey versus looking forward to the destination. And I think so often in life, we look forward to something where, my life is going to start when this thing happens, or I'm going to feel that sense of accomplishment when I get there. Mm-hmm. But so often, if we don't enjoy the journey, what makes us think we're going to enjoy the destination, which is really just another part of the journey, the greater journey. And so I think that's pretty incredible. So the entire thing took 3 weeks?
Yeah, it takes 19 days up and down.
Okay. So like how many hours during the day were you?
You're hiking for about 8 hours almost every day
Wow.
while you're up there. The summit day took 15 hours. So the moment I made that realization was we were about halfway to the top. And I remember we're about halfway to the top. We get over this crest, and it was just so hard because you got this huge hill, and it just doesn't stop. Like you look at the top and you see like a crest where like you see the top of the hill, but all that is just another hill and another hill and another. Like it just doesn't ever end. It's like an eternal hike.
Yeah.
But so we get to the top, in which we're only halfway. We don't realize that. It looks like the summit's pretty close, right?
Yeah.
So we're thinking differently in our minds, and then I made that realization where I was like, oh, like. It's like, actually, this is just fun. Like, I'm enjoying this. And that was, again, because, I did put in the training I needed to be able to do that. But also, like, just part of my perspective on it was, like, the hiking was, like, the easy part. Like, it was an obvious goal. I knew where I was heading. And then realizing that the summit wasn't necessarily the most important part, but just enjoying it was a lot of fun, though.
Yeah.
And, it was a hard hike, I'll say, by the end. You're feeling it.
I can imagine.
Well, after you get to because you hike up in the dark, right? So you're in the dark most of the time on going up, so you don't see any of this, right? So that's kind of the nice part, right? Because you're not looking up the hill the whole time. All you're doing is just putting one foot in front of the other. And one thing they say down there is paso a paso, step by step. Yep. And that's all they say is like you just hike it one step at a time, step by step. And then, it's almost like a little mantra too. So you kind of get in like this almost meditative state where it's dark, you're not looking all the time, and you're just moving. And then, especially on the way back, you don't remember having to go up all these hills on the way back down, just because, I wasn't as focused on it until, we started getting closer. Then you're always, kind of trying to see where you're at. But, especially when you're hiking up in the dark like that, it's almost like that ignorance is bliss type deal, right? Sure. Like, you can't see it, so it doesn't matter as much. All you're doing is just moving. And
so what are, like, the thoughts going through your mind as you're just, like, putting one foot in front of the other? Are you just thinking normal things? Or, are you thinking about breathing? Like, what was...
So, you definitely had to start thinking about breathing when you got close to the top. Yeah. We had done, like, a lot of acclimation on the way. But, that's one thing that got pretty important. Now, during the beginning of the hike, I was actually singing. I was just singing and, like, hiking and just... kind of belting out when we were all hiking there together. Yeah. But, that was the main thing, is it wasn't necessarily, like, thinking about something specific, but, like, I don't know. And then once you get into the mode of things, like, you didn't as much think as you did. It was more of, like, a meditative state where, like, your mind wasn't really focused on a single thing, but it was more so just experiencing those steps.
Just presence and step
just
by
like
step.
being present.
What was right
and
there.
then that way the time would pass quicker, too, because you were just present in your steps. You walk in a way that like it's that repetition to where you're able to.
Dude, that's
so
an
many
interesting.
beautiful metaphors.
Yeah. That's what I was just thinking. I was thinking about like
if we didn't know that you were climbing a mountain and you were talking about some other really incredible feat. Mm-hmm. I think the exact same principles would apply.
Well, and I find it interesting because I don't know why this came to my mind. Maybe it's just because I've been spending so much time with my girls lately. But they grow up so fast, right? People say that all the time. They're like, they're going to grow up so fast. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if it's because kids force you to be present more often. Like, if time passes faster when you're in the present, then kids help you stay in the present.
Yeah. I mean,
does that make sense? Like, when I'm with my daughter, like, she wants me to be present. Like, she'll come up, she'll literally grab my face, and she does this to strangers. She goes, hi. She'll like make me listen.
Absolutely.
And so I think that's a powerful principle, though.
But I think that's what children aren't present.
Yeah,
they are present to their needs, what's going on right at the moment. I don't think kids necessarily think a whole lot about the long term. Yeah, when they go to like touch the stove or whatever, they're not thinking long term. They're just like, oh, pretty, like boom, and then the pain becomes present. And I think it'd be interesting to study at what point do we start to like think about the future or reflect on the past.
Right.
When does that happen? When
does that begin? Yeah, that's a good point.
But the question I had was, take me to the moment when you finally reached the summit. Like, what's going through your mind? Like, what are the feelings? What's the emotions of that moment?
It was really neat. I mean, coming up over that last hill, we had another group that was just right ahead of us. So you had a whole bunch of people there that kind of cheering you on those
Mhm.
last couple steps, and we cheer the people after us, right? So everybody's kind of supporting each other as you get there. But I remember just being tired. I mean, by the time you get there, it's like, whoa, like that was a long hike, you
Yeah.
know? And you're kind of,
Yeah.
you're like,
You said 19 days, right?
yeah.
8-hour days, 19.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a lot of hours.
We had like 1 or 2, you have a couple rest days, maybe 2 or 3 over the whole trip. And again, I actually don't even remember how hard it was. I just remember, oh yeah, I got to the top. It was awesome. Like, it was a lot of fun, you know? And then I'm thinking about it, I'm like, oh yeah, I was actually pretty tired. Like, you know, I got up there, I was like, oh yeah. I remember laying down on the stones, and like, you're just laying there and looking up. And it's actually interesting because when you get to the top, it's just massive flat rock.
Yeah.
You know, that's the whole top there. So it was pretty neat in the fact that, you know, you just laid back. I remember resting for a minute and then getting up and, you know, talking with everybody up there and enjoying the experience. And you don't spend that long on the top just because you got a long hike back. But, you know, it was really fun, you know, and it was exhilarating. You know, you get to the top, you're like, oh, you're there. Like, I don't know. Yeah.
What's the view like? What's the view like from up there?
The view is pretty intense, you know. You can see
imagine.
pretty far, and, you know, you're definitely a lot taller than everything around you.
Yeah.
I remember taking a picture of it on our way back on the plane, and you can see the plane is only, you know, 1,000 feet above where you can see the peak, you know, where we were standing a couple days before that.
Yeah.
So, and actually the way up takes 16, 17 days, and you're out of there in 2.5, 3 days. So we just, you know, like a big thing about that is, you know, you just had to take your time.
Yeah.
Like, a part of you wants to just go fast. And, you know, because especially with me, like, I just want to go fast. Especially when I hit trails around here. I know how hard I can push myself, but when you have so much less oxygen and you're hiking a mountain like that, if you go fast, you're just going to fall over and be tired. So the main thing is just going at a pace where you're not necessarily overextending yourself. Like, you're pushing yourself and you're pushing through walls because those walls are going to be there. But, like, you're just essentially you're just moving forward.
Yeah. And
it's in a way that you're not overextending yourself, but you're taking your time and moving, you know, and you just never stop moving. Like, it's a lot more beneficial just to take it a step at a time than it is to go really fast and then rest and really fast and then rest. That's just going to wear you out. So we just take, you know, we take just a couple rests on the way up, but most of the time you're just taking very small steps.
Yeah.
Yeah. And actually at the
Everyone
end of the
should
climb...
be listening to what he just said. That's very important.
Well, I'll tell you, once you almost get to the top, you're taking very small steps.
Yeah.
Like, literally, you're just stepping almost only halfway past your boot. We had the last, oh, my goodness, it was probably the last 100 yards took almost an hour in itself.
Oh my gosh.
You know, like,
Wow.
yeah.
Because just how small this
Yeah,
steps.
you just had to take tiny little steps. If you took a couple big steps, you would literally be out of breath. So, like,
Goodness.
you just had to take these tiny little steps, and the top's right there, so you just want to run.
Yeah.
But, like, you can't. Like, you got to take smaller steps than you ever have before, just because, you know,
That's
there's just a lack of oxygen up there.
oh my
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
So it was pretty cool, though. But, yeah, it was a really neat experience, and, I mean, I feel like I gained a lot from it. And,
Yeah, but that's kind of what changes after you do that. Like, after you go through something that challenging, something that, you know, you train for that long, the hike itself is 19 days. Like, you have that experience where you're literally walking 100 yards for an hour.
yeah.
Like, what changes after that experience?
Well, you come home and nothing's changed. You
Yeah.
know, like, nothing ever changes in that aspect. But, like, you yourself, like, realize that, you know, it's like, okay, maybe things aren't as hard as you think they are. Like, you can overcome particular challenges. You can take certain risks. Like, I mean, it broadens your own personal perspective for sure.
Yeah.
Right? And for me, I found that, like, you know, having that obvious goal made my, like, training for that, it wasn't hard, right? When you're going through the day-to-day things, like, things do become hard, right? Getting to work every day when you're getting tired of it, or doing whatever else, going in and out, those things become hard. But when I had that obvious goal in mind, right, and I knew what I needed to do to be on the summit, that wasn't difficult, right? So when you have, like, that point in the distance where you know you need to reach, all those other little steps, you already know what you need to do to get there, right? So it's like, okay, if I want to stand on the summit, I have to go hike today, right? So I'd wake up in the morning, and that would, like, it becomes a necessity if you really want it.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Well, and I like how you kept saying, you know, you would almost experience, like, the idea and the feeling of reaching the summit so many times that wasn't really even what you were thinking about.
Yeah.
It was just about the journey. And
yeah.
And I think Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
again, the parallels.
Yeah,
are,
I think
are,
there's.
are
I think
obvious.
there's. I agree.
Yeah.
I like almost don't even think we need to expound on it. I
No.
think that there. It's like
My
there's
question.
so many. Yeah.
Oh, sorry,
go ahead.
not to
go
cut
ahead.
you.
No.
My
go
question
ahead.
is though, like after that experience, do you like, if you're in a situation where you want to go talk to a girl or something, and you're just like, I've climbed a mountain, so like this is nothing, or is it like, I wonder that, like a dude who's been to space, like what could possibly scare that guy after that, like.
And I mean, I guess that happened to an extent. I don't know if that happened necessarily with me as much. With my main personality, it was mainly just realizing that, choosing what your focus is a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
And I found that kind of changed my perspective on where my focus needs to be in my own life.
Absolutely.
And that was a big thing for me. So especially when I went through that experience, especially with all the other experiences that led up to that. Because we had a whole year of training, but there was quite a bit of other things that happened during that year that changed.
we had that family tragedy that we've talked
Mm-hmm.
about.
Yeah.
That was a few months.
Yeah, that was in July, August, and then we left in November.
Yeah.
Okay.
September, October, November. So we were even considering not going anymore. We're like, hey, everything's already scheduled. We're going to go anyways. And, that's really what I brought out of it, considering my own personal life at the time. And it was just mainly like deciding what that focus is going to be, right? Yeah. And it's working on that decision, and then, obviously that's going to change over time. But it's like deciding what that's going to be, even if it's not forever. But, for the time being, and what, like, essentially, I wouldn't have done all the training and I wouldn't have done all the things if I didn't really want to get to the summit, right? So it's essentially deciding that it's like, here's the summit I want to hike, and this is where I want to be, and then doing those things that are necessary to achieve that goal.
Right.
Yeah.
And even if it seems crazy to anybody else, like you already know, it's like, oh yeah, I need to do this so I can be where I want to be when I want to be there.
Yeah. Right. If you can dedicate
so
yourself
that you're
to the
not,
end.
So that you're not stuck on the, halfway through the trail and everyone else goes up without you.
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of really fit, strong guys that didn't make it, got really sick. And that's just where the altitude comes into play, too. I mean, we had an advantage living in Utah where we're living pretty high and we'd go up to, top of Temp in a couple hours and back. And, we'd hike these, we'd be able to get a decent amount of elevation in, so we were able to acclimate pretty well.
Right. When
you had other people that they just couldn't breathe anymore.
Yeah, they're living on the coast, or they're living down on sea level. And
well, and we had some really, we had some fit guys
out.
that competed in some national competitions, like the Tour de la France. We had a guy from Spain who'd done that for several years, and he went and hiked Kilimanjaro, and then he wanted to go hike Aconcagua, and he couldn't make it, but he took so much from the experience based on his own personal experience. I mean, we talked a lot about that when we got back down too.
Yeah.
So and that's also disappointing, right? Because we're always encouraging them to stick with us. Like, come on, like we can get there. But then, sometimes, you just can't push through those walls. And also, I mean, you do run out of oxygen.
Yeah.
So.
How many people that showed up to hike it didn't end up making it to the top?
Well, our crew was pretty good because. So essentially, we had kind of our core crew of 4 plus our 2 guides, and we had 2 other guys that would join us for part of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So out of those 6, 4 made it and 2 didn't.
Okay.
Yeah, but ours was actually one of the better crews because I know there were quite a few others that
didn't have that much.
Yeah, there were even like guides that like we had to have a couple people join our crew because you had some people that had to turn around, so we had a couple extra people join us on the way too.
Wow,
that's intense.
Yeah.
Wow, that's powerful, man.
Yeah, but it's a really neat experience. And again, the culture down there is amazing. Argentina, like the people are so accommodating. I remember I never liked honeydew until I got to the first camp after hiking for 8 hours.
Yeah.
And they had this honeydew they had literally picked 2 days before and brought up, and they had it chopped open, and I was like, I just dug in, and now I love honeydew. I actually used to never eat it, and then I had this big old chunk of melon sitting there, and I'm like, it was just the juiciest, best thing you ever tasted. It's just funny how, there's just like you extend yourself to a point where you get to somewhere and you experience something that is just so much more fulfilling than it normally is, right? You cut up a nice piece of honeydew when you're at home. You enjoy it, but you would never enjoy it like I enjoyed that honeydew.
In the middle of the mountains.
I came all the way to Argentina and hiked 8 hours for this honeydew.
Even when you're experiencing, like, even some of the meals they had, you come off the summit after summiting that mountain, and you drop down to base camp, and you have everybody that's going up still, and you have, your crew that's coming down where you have all the people that summited. So you're able to meet these other people who are on their way while you're on your way back. And, you have this big meal and everybody, it's like, it's just really neat because you wouldn't have, it increases your appreciation for certain things.
Yeah.
Right? So, like, I wouldn't have appreciated certain things to the extent that I did had I not gone through the experience before. Like had I not gone through the 8 hours of hiking, I wouldn't have appreciated that melon that was cut up when I was so thirsty and hungry, and it satisfied both needs, and I was like, oh,
yeah. So I think that's a pretty good segue. I just want to double check on time. Yeah, we're doing good. So I think that's a pretty good segue to the experience that you had in Kilimanjaro, which was a very different experience. So I
have a feeling we're about to talk about something not as great.
No.
So honeydew melon is not as good.
Yeah.
Kilimanjaro.
Which I think this is a pretty good contrast though, because I guess I'll let you get into it. What happened when you guys got off the plane?
Okay, so before I hop into that, I do want to just reiterate, the food, the people, everything on that experience was it was just perfect, to be honest.
Like $6,000. That's the outlet.
Yeah, and the amount they give you for that, that is even including my flight, and the amount they do for you when you're down there, it blows my mind, and again, that does help them because a lot of those guys who are guiding us, they then use the money they make leading people hiking mountains to go to school during the rest of the year. It's kind of it's an interesting thing, but again, everything there was it was an amazing experience. It was definitely difficult, but again, I don't usually remember those parts. I just remember how great it was. Mm-hmm. When I really think about it, I'm like, oh yeah, training was hard. Yeah, I didn't remember that. Yeah, I pushed myself really hard to train. And I was like, yeah, I had to push through some walls. I was really tired, and I'm like, oh. I forget about those parts. All I remember is how great it was. Yeah. Now, in contrast, when I went to Kilimanjaro, now keep in mind this isn't always the case.
Right.
We went to Kilimanjaro. We had signed up for a safari as well as hiking Kilimanjaro, right? And we had 5 days to hike Kilimanjaro, which is already shorter than most people do, because most people hike it in either 7. 7's pretty average. Some people go up to 9 to 12. And then, 5 is you got to know what you're doing and you get up and get down, right? Because there's still that level of acclimation. Yeah. Now, on Aconcagua, I do want to reference this because it's a pretty cool point. You would hike high, during the day, and then you'd sleep low. Right? So, during the day, you'd push yourself, kind of to your threshold, and then you drop back down and sleep. So you're kind of pushing yourself, and then you go back to where you can rest. And then after you've done that twice and you've shoveled your gear up, then you go up and you rest at that camp. Gotcha. And then what you do is the next day, then you go to the next level. So you're pushing yourself past your barriers just to go back behind them, and then doing so again. And then you're carrying all your gear and shuttling that up the mountain.
And without doing that, you would be waking up with far worse headaches, and that's one thing I know you guys ran into, and Dad ran into a lot of that. They would get, because you don't breathe as deeply.
Yeah.
Well, so, you'd fall asleep. I'm sorry to interrupt you. So you'd fall asleep, and and then you'd wake up 20, 25 minutes later. And this was at the final camp, by the way. This wasn't the whole trip. Now, you'd get in a level of this. You'd feel it along the way for sure. Mm-hmm. But then as you adjust to the camp you're at, you were fine. But we were at the tallest camp. And I remember going to sleep and being waking up and 20, 25 minutes later, be your brain would hurt because it doesn't have any oxygen. Yeah. So you wake up with this killer headache and you're like, and you just breathe deeply for 5 to 10 minutes and you'd feel better and you're like, okay. And then you'd become so tired, overwhelmingly exhausted. You'd be like, no, I don't want to sleep. And then you'd fall asleep, and then you just repeat that cycle all night long. And that sounds terrible. Yeah, I actually forgot about that. I mentioned that, but it was kind of funny because you would just repeat this cycle where you'd wake up and you're so oxygen deprived where you just have to breathe deeply, and then breathing deeply would reoxygenate the brain so you'd feel better. And then you'd get so tired where you couldn't stay awake, and then you'd fall back asleep and just repeat that all night long. That was all night, and that was for probably the last 2 nights before you get to the summit. That was the whole evening. That would still happen. On the other nights.
That'd be a wonderful hell. Living that for eternity.
You're
so tired,
and you fall asleep, and then you just suffer for it. You wake up and you're like, oh my god,
where's all the burning and demons I was promised?
Yeah, so that was actually a really funny experience, just those last couple nights. I know, it didn't affect me until those last couple nights before we got to the summit, but I know my dad, it started affecting him earlier than it did me, so he kind of lost some more sleep than I did. just because you'd go through that cycle where you just wouldn't have.
And he summited too, right?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Holy cow.
yeah, yeah, and that was really an accomplishment. Like that was a
powerful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, this is a guy that his freaking.
He broke 7 ribs and still got out of the canyon.
And at his age, when you break that many ribs, 1 out of 4,
No, it was half.
Yeah, well, yeah, 2/3 of the people never make it to the hospital when they're that age and break that many ribs.
Goodness.
Yeah. It's not only did he get up, because I was actually there with him that time too, because he had gotten tossed off a horse, and he landed on literally a rock that was this big, and it went right up his back and just snapped all 7 ribs. But I remember being there and trying helping him up, and then he just took tiny little steps to get to the truck and then driving him to the hospital. But again, this is a guy that's done some pretty crazy crap.
Yeah,
right.
Well,
he grew up on either way.
He got my dad's story. I actually would love if he wrote a book someday, because he had a pretty interesting life, to say the least. They had to re-break his legs every year for a while. Because he got his leg stuck in a corn chopper, and they didn't align his leg perfectly, so they would re-break it and then try to align.
Had to wear braces on his legs,
and then he went on to become.
He was 12 years old, running the farm. He'd go through and run the irrigation all night long at 12, and
and then he went to state for football and for wrestling. The dude's just a beast.
Yeah, to say the least. And either way, though, this is what he says was the hardest thing he's ever done. Yeah. Right? So, it kind of just shows you that different level. Even though we were in the exact same place doing the exact same thing, it was a completely different experience. Yeah. So, either way, though, he made it, which is amazing. Yeah. And going back to Kilimanjaro, again, I could talk about Aconcagua all day just because it was so amazing. And, even when you begin to think about it, you remember all these additional things. You're like, oh, what about this? And then, so you kind of can get into it. But going to Kilimanjaro, we first arrived. We were supposed to hike the mountain right away, right? But our guides don't show up, and they're like, oh, you have to go for your safari first. So we're like, that wasn't really what we planned for, but, that's okay. So we ended up having to go way out of our way out to the safari area, way away from Kilimanjaro to go do these safaris, which was still a blast, by the way. Yeah. Beautiful animals. I remember there was one time where big lion, right? He was kind of a little older, and you could just tell he didn't give a shit. He was just walking. we pull our
spirit
Jeep.
Animal right there, that lion that just walked
because you saw the pride of the lions, you saw this big one, and then you saw the big master of the pack type guy, and then you saw another 2 younger lions, one that was a little older, and then a younger one, and then you saw with all the lionesses, they were kind of lounging. We got some good pictures of them. But then you had this big one that was just walking by himself. And you could tell that he was kind of hit his prime and he's on his way down. But we pull our Jeep right in front of him, and he just doesn't even move his path. He doesn't even move. He walks all the way up to where he reaches our Jeep, and he just walks around it, and then he just keeps going. He's like, you guys can't do anything to me. I just
you stupid whippersnappers.
Yeah. So we saw some really cool stuff. Had a lot of fun. We actually met some really awesome people. The people in our group were super engaging. Made some. I still keep in contact with even people from Aconcagua too. Yeah. We'll send each other pictures throughout the year just of what's going on. Right. Where we're at. So it's actually really neat. And in Kilimanjaro, met some really neat people. Really neat guy. His name's Erki. He's from Estonia? Yeah, Estonia, all right? And he was actually part of the city council there in Estonia. He was traveling around Africa for 6 months because he wanted to humble himself, right? He kind of saw himself as a big shot, and he really wanted to kind of experience how the other side lives. So cool. I met some really unique characters while I was there. But so either way, we actually got a really good chance to bond with those. So I do appreciate, where we were at. I think it really kind of gave us an opportunity to do things we wouldn't have done before anyways. For sure. But either way, it wasn't what we expected, but it turned out good is what I'm trying to say. So we go on the safari and we come back, and then, we're going to hike this mountain. And we wake up early, we have all of our stuff packed, and we're sitting there. And the guides were supposed to show up at 7 a.m. And we're sitting there, and nobody's there. Nobody shows up. So we're sitting there, and it's 8 a.m. Nobody's there. Nobody shows up. And we've got 5 days. We've got a time crunch because we have a flight home. And it's we're already going on a short amount of time. Yeah. And just nobody's showing up. We're just sitting there. We're okay, where are these guys at? So we start calling him. And we get online, the guy who my dad paid over the online to set it up with, and he's like, oh yeah, they're supposed to be there soon, and he kind of jumps through the, kind of brushes over it, says they're supposed to be there. So like, okay, as long as they're here by like 9 or 10, like we can still hit the trail on time. It's fine, So I'm getting a little frustrated. My dad's got a leveler head than I do. I'm getting a little pissed.
Yeah.
But either way, just nobody shows up. So long story short, we wait, and it's like noon, and nobody's arrived. So we go to try to track down his office. So we're using our phones to try to find out where this guy's office is at. Essentially, he had done we had sent the payment through like a different facility that actually paid him, because he had like a legitimate thing going on. I think he just dropped the ball and like just didn't do what he was supposed to set things up, and then just took off with our money. And actually, one of the guys that was with us had also paid the same person to take him on like another, to do more activities. But again, nobody showed up for anybody. Yeah, that's so crazy. They just took off with the money, and we tried to find out how we could get that back. And out there, you have to pay the police if you want to have anything done. So either way, long story short, we're out a couple bucks, right? So we had paid. Fortunately, it wasn't as expensive, but I think overall, because we did get our safari, right? So we didn't lose all the money, because they did still pay for our safari. But when it came to getting up the mountain, just nobody showed up for 5 days, and for the 5 days, nobody showed up to take us there or anything, right?
Jeez.
So either way, long story short, that whole day goes by. We're pretty mad about it, but my dad runs into somebody on the street who says he can get us up the mountain. And I was fairly reluctant. Now, I'm really happy I did, because had I not, I probably would have been pretty disappointed going home without getting there. But,
so now you've got 4 days.
Yeah, well, we leave that night, right? So we hit the trail literally before they close the gates at 6 p.m. They close the gates at 6 and don't let anybody up. And we hit the trail at 6 p.m. There were these guys, they're like, hey, we're going to throw this together for you. And they got us up there that night. So we hopped in their truck, they grabbed our gear, and we went out, and we actually hit the road and got up there, right? Wow. So it ended up costing us double than what we expected. But we got up to the trailhead, we hit it at 6 p.m., and we made it all the way up to the first camp to go to bed, right? So we just went up late, brought our headlamps. So instead of doing 5 days, it got all the way condensed down, because 6 p.m. we left that night, and we were up at the summit 6 p.m., 4.5 days, at 6 a.m., 4.5 days later. So we kind of summited in less time than we expected.
Yeah.
But, we did hit the trail. It was a real blessing to have them with us. But again, when it comes to the culture difference, is that, everyone there is, helping you because they have a reason to. And when I say that, it's not necessarily, it's just, they just try to get anything they can out of you, you know, which was just frustrating. It was a huge turnoff for me. The food I could have eaten in Aconcagua, the 21 days, I never got tired of the food. Yeah. Every time they had something new, it was delicious. They did an amazing job. This time, even after 4.5 days, I couldn't eat another bite of the food they were feeding us. I'm serious. I remember the first day, it was really good. Second day, it was okay. And the third day, I was okay, I'm getting tired. And then, it was just a night and day difference. You know, first thing is we lose all our money because some guy takes off with it and we can't get a hold of him and he's gone. Yeah. And then, which, by the way, once we notified all the other companies, they get pissed because it ruins their reputation, especially trying to get other people and trying to get people there to hike it. Yeah. Right. So because that guy did that, he's out of the industry now. They just knocked him out just because, that's not a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they kind of hold each other accountable on that level because there's no one really to do that, right? There's not as much.
Yeah.
I'm not, it's just a different world over there.
For sure.
So either way, just night and day difference, but we did make it, and the main thing I kept thinking was man, this is a lot easier. We weren't hiking 6-hour days. We'd blow up the trail and get to the next camp in 4 hours. And then we'd just hang out and just kind of relax for the rest of the night, and that's how the whole trip went kind of that way. Now the summit day was definitely longer, but that was an 8-hour day, not 15.
Yeah. Holy cow.
Yeah. So again, everything was just really condensed in the way that it was a much easier path. But but again, it was a totally different experience because I really enjoyed speaking with them and learning more about them, especially on the way up. I got to know my guides a little better, and we talked a lot. But I remember after we got back, we were just tired, just because it was a long hike for such a short amount of time. And I can hop back into the summit and the experience there, though. But I remember getting back, and it was just like they just kept trying to pull you into these shops. Everybody, when you're walking down the street, is like, "Hey, brother," and like they try to like grab you and pull you into their shop.
Yeah.
Like everybody acts like they know you just so they can get something out of you, and I just was like, I was kind of fed up by the end of the trip.
Right.
But when we were on the trail, I am super grateful for them that were involved. Right, like they did get us on the mountain. They got us up there in time to be able to get back in time for our flight, which was super awesome. Like that was a really good thing.
Right.
We got up to the camps. We got up to the base camp there. Super popular mountain too.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more people. We made our way to the summit that summit day. We left, early, went up, got there at about 6 a.m. As the sun was coming up, we stood there. Sun just barely came up, take some amazing pictures, and then, went back down. And much more condensed trip.
Right.
Still super fun. Me and my dad went together again, had a blast.
One thing I like that you guys said though while you were climbing this mountain, this is something that I think is important. Whenever it was hard, what would you guys say? Do you remember when you told me? You're like, well, at least it's not Aconcagua.
Yeah, that's what we'd say. Yeah, and we're like, oh, like you'd be hiking and you're like, oh man, this trail's taking a while. Because we had actually blown up the first two, right? Mm-hmm. Because the first two trails we just blew through them so quick. Yeah. And then the third one to the third camp before you hit the summit, it was like taking a little longer. And we're like, well, at least we only got an hour left instead of 6. Like, it's like everything was just so much easier in retrospect because we had already hiked this other mountain that just took so much longer. It was so much more intensive. Yeah. You spent twice as much time on everything than you did here. And with this one, like other people would be hiking, we'd be blowing past them. Like we were going really fast just because it just was easier. Yeah. So much easier. Having gone through that thing that was so hard, and then like in contrast, it was like, yeah, this isn't Aconcagua. We'd get to camp and we'd have hours left to just hang out and like talk to people there and read a book and so.
Yeah, and I think that's a pretty important principle. I really like that when you told me that because David Goggins kind of talks about this principle of like putting your hand in your cookie jar. Like, oh, I've been through some really hard shit before, right? Like, I can go in and see, like, oh, yeah, that's right, I went through that. I can do this, right? And I think that's, it's a pretty obvious principle, but it's, if you've been through hard things, if you connect purpose to your suffering, then when you're going through suffering again, I don't feel like it's as hard. Especially if it's not, sometimes there can be that fear that it's going to get as bad as it was, right? Yeah. Like, I know sometimes I'll feel that. I'm like, oh, like if it got as bad as it did, but then I'm like, what are the chances of that happening? Not very high.
Yeah.
And then other people will look at you, and I feel like I've looked at other people this way as well. I'm like, wow, that person's so strong. Why are they so strong? And then you find out, typically, they've been through something extremely difficult. Yeah. And so for them, they're not strong. This is just normal, and it's fine, and everything's going to be okay. Yeah. Because they went through something really difficult.
Yeah.
Well, it's that idea that like no one worth anything to say had an easy time getting there.
Yeah.
Like no one.
Yeah.
And that's just there are no shortcuts in life. There's no shortcuts up to a mountain.
Yeah.
You got to take the path. Like there's you got to train. You got to put in the time. You have to put on the mask that restricts your air. Like that sounds miserable to me, but the more that you're able to do that, and the stronger you get,
right,
the more you're able to take on. And my question is, what's your next mountain?
Well, that's a good question. I was thinking of knocking out the Elbrus. It's technically in Russia, but it is the Europe side, so that would be the tallest one in Europe. That one's not that tall. It would only take me like 2 days.
Yeah.
The main thing with what's left is I have. First thing is going to be if I wanted to go up McKinley or Denali, depending on who you're talking to. They'll call it
I think they officially changed it to Denali.
Really?
Yeah,
changed
in the last
it to Denali?
year.
Okay. Yeah. So Denali, you have Denali up in Alaska, right? Which is the native tongue for the mountain anyways. Right. That one's fairly expensive, so some of them I won't be able to do, right?
Well, and that one has so many storms.
Yeah, so
you
that
have to
one's...
attempt it a couple of times typically before you can summit it.
Yeah, the main thing with the one, again, the weather's more unpredictable. The nice thing about Aconcagua is it's actually taller than the rest of these mountains, but it's also in the middle of a desert.
Yeah.
So, like, the weather isn't necessarily unpredictable. We actually hit it perfectly when it came to the weather. Same with Kilimanjaro. We actually hit it perfectly when it came to the weather.
Right.
And when it comes to, like Denali, that one's like, it's like a $20,000-$25,000 venture, right?
Holy
so
cow.
it's definitely going to be a lot more intensive when it comes to...
What makes the difference in terms of...
Just the amount of time. It's going to take about as long as Aconcagua did. It's a couple thousand feet shorter, but it still takes about the same amount of time acclimating. The weather is totally different.
Yeah.
You're way up north, so you've got way more snow, you've got glaciers you've got to cross, you've got to get an outfit that knows what they're doing. Plus, it's on the American side of things,
so
you're going to cost a lot more because cost
Makes
of living's a lot higher up here, right? Down in Argentina, cost of living is a lot lower. So when you pay even the amount we did, which was like $4,500 a person, that's still enough to pay their whole crew and everybody involved with us, right? Like you have a couple.
For the food.
We had our 4 people with our core group, even with the 2 that would join us, and each of us paying that much, like that pays for everybody that's involved, the cooks, the guides, and we tip them quite a bit too. But and then you think about doing that in the United States, like it's just going to cost a lot more.
For sure.
So
that makes sense.
and then you have I do want to do the Himalayan base camp sometime. I don't know if I'll ever hike Everest. That one's kind of still up in the air for me. I know I could do it, but we'll have to see.
The cost of that, would it be?
Yeah, that's again $50,000 you're looking at. So it's pretty expensive.
Well, and that's a 3-month.
Yeah, and you actually have to spend. I think they said you could summit it in like 45 days.
Holy
cow!
So I did not realize that.
Yeah, so it's a much longer trek, and that's 45 days is like on like you're still got to be doing pretty good to do that.
Yeah.
Wow. So when it comes to things like that, it's again some of those are going to be farther down the line. Just because I just had these opportunities that arose, and we're like, okay, let's go for it. We can. I had the ability to do so I took advantage of that. And with Kilimanjaro, I decided about a month before. We're like, like my dad was going out to Africa for my brother Sam to go on a hunting trip in South Africa. And he's like, why don't I take a flight up to Kilimanjaro and we'll go hike this together? And I was like, okay. So, it's kind of more of a last minute thing, but it was just taking advantage of the opportunity.
But then you already had all the gear.
Exactly.
We
already had all the gear. It reduced cost dramatically that way too. And then there's another one. Elbrus will get me down to 3. So I'll have 4 left. Okay, so you have Denali and Everest. And then the other 2 you have are Antarctica, right?
Yeah, the one in Antarctica.
Again, that one's gonna take some work.
Would be sick.
And then you have Indonesia.
Get like dropped off by a fishing boat.
Yeah, seriously.
So with Indonesia, again, the mountain isn't particularly tall, but it's insanely hard to get to. The only people around that mountain are Aborigines, and all of those people you actually have to hike through like 15 miles of jungle just to get to the base of this mountain.
Really?
And once you get there, you have to rope up across these rope bridges where you're balancing with 2 ropes on each side and you're walking down a rope on the middle, crossing chasms that just drop down with rock chasms hundreds of feet. So like, so the main reason we hit these other mountains where they were accessible, really good. Like you definitely have to put in work if you want to get down Aconcagua. Kilimanjaro is kind of a mountain that basically anybody can make it up if you take your time, and if you're fit and, you take your time doing it. So, those are the ones that are accomplishable. And again, the main reason I got fixated on Aconcagua is I even said a year and a half before we even did it, I'm like, hey, I want to hike this mountain,
Yeah.
I was like, this one seems cool. I could do it. It's in my price range right now. Like,
in Aconcagua, where are you at the top? Like, what's the elevation?
It's just under 23,000 feet.
Okay, and they don't use bottled oxygen at all.
Yeah, at all. So that's actually where you'd usually click into oxygen when you're heading up to Everest. It's right around like 21,000 feet actually. So you're going past that limit. So there were a couple guys even there who were up on top of Aconcagua who had climbed Everest. One of the guys, it was like this Polish guy. it was super funny because I got to the top and I see him there smoking a cigarette. He's like, I summited this mountain. Like, he's like smoking a cigarette.
He's smoking a cigarette at the top of
That's like after he like made love with the mountain,
right?
Just
like, who needs oxygen?
Well, actually,
that's kind of hardcore.
They've done actually an experiment on him, and the reason he was able to do that is because his brain is used to like oxygen all the time.
Oh, because he's smoking.
Yeah. So his brain's already oxygen deprived. So it's like, just cutting it out for a couple weeks is already going to make him that much better.
It's like, this just feels like a walk to the grocery store.
Yeah, well, anyways, this Polish guy, he had already hiked it before, but he came up with a whole bunch of his friends, and he'd also hiked Everest. He's like, oh yeah, if you can hike this mountain, you can hike Everest. Because you click into oxygen right around where you hit on Denali, too.
Right.
The max of Denali around 21,000 feet. That's when they throw on oxygen.
Okay.
Yeah.
And keep going. So, that's what he says, though. He's like, yeah, if you can hike this, you can hike Everest. I'm like, oh, well, that makes me feel a little better about it. I'm like, yeah. So I could get to the top of Everest if I wanted to. Again, there's just a lot of extenuating circumstances that get into that one as well.
And then Everest as well. Why weather's a big issue on Everest.
Weather's a big issue.
Yeah. And if and you can get scrubbed, 200. You can get scrubbed 100 yards from the top, and they have to like turn around.
Yep.
There's a storm coming. Turn
Yeah.
around,
Well, and then you got that 100 yards now.
Yeah.
Even with the oxygen, that's still a half an hour of hiking.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you don't even realize how that's tiny space because you're moving pretty quick down here, but then like you get slower and slower as you get to the top.
Well, and that's what happened with if you've ever seen the movie Everest.
It's been been a bit. But...
that's what happened with that whole crew is they overextended themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone who died on there, they should have turned around.
So it's possible for like climbing Everest to pay 40-50 grand and not.
Yeah. And just go home, pack home with nothing.
And
I'm not the type of person that's okay with that.
No, like that.
Like, actually, I am now, like, in an extent. Like, I realized that there are things more important than getting to the top.
Sure.
Right.
So, like, turning around would be... Actually, that's the funny thing, too, is, like, I kind of answered immediately, like, no, I wouldn't be... And then I kind of really thought, I was like, oh, actually, like, yeah, I would. Like, if it was my life or reaching the top of a mountain, like, what's really more important?
Right.
You know?
Right.
And it's like, I figure I'll stick around rather than...
Yeah.
Right.
Becoming a marker up there. There's actually literally people that they're like, oh, yeah, you passed the guy with, like, the green jacket and boots. You know, like... Because you can't retrieve them.
red boots and stuff like that. You can't get them off the mountain, and they're perfectly preserved. So
they're almost like there's literally people up there that have become like mummified. You know, so just the cold and the wind, like it's like being in an eternal freezer.
Right.
Holy cow.
Well, isn't it Edmund Hillary, the first guy who climbed it? Didn't the Sherpa that climbed it with him? Didn't the Sherpa didn't make it back?
I can't remember right now.
I think the Sherpa froze.
First one who climbed Everest.
Yeah. Hillary.
Yeah, Edmund Hillary. So, New Zealand guy.
Yeah.
But, no, I think that's fascinating, man. I think...
Absolutely.
So, if... Really, I guess we'll just kind of end with this, but what... If you were to, like... how do I say this? How do I ask this question? You're better at asking questions than I am. But...
I don't know about that.
I think you are. You're really good at asking questions. But
I'm gonna have a talk show someday.
Yeah, that's right, man. It's called Red Beard. But if you were to say that, like, what was your biggest takeaway from both those mountains, from your entire experience climbing both of them? Like, if you were to say, like, I really kind of figured this out about myself. I figured out how to connect to myself, connect to others, or connect to God. In a specific way. If maybe you don't have anything like that and you're like, oh, it was just a good experience, great. But if you have anything like that, is there anything you could leave us with?
I'd have to think about it a little bit. I have two things that kind of come to mind. So the first one was the same thing I told you before, right? Was that, like, even though the summit's important to me and I'm really happy I got to the summit and I'm able to be like, oh yeah, I made it there. Like, I found that those around me reaching the summit was more important to me than actually me reaching the summit. Because it was kind of that realization that it's like, oh, like, I could make it there. Yeah. But, like, those around me either making it to the summit or being okay. And, like, like, again, it's just, like, those lives around me were more important than getting to the top of a mountain. Right?
Getting to the top alone or bringing others with you.
Yeah, exactly. Like, getting to the top alone wasn't, like, a priority. It was for about the first half. And then there was, like, a change where I was like, oh, that's no longer a priority. Like, it doesn't matter to me. I'll turn around, and I wouldn't even go to the top if, I wasn't going to make it there with my dad. And, like, that was more important because I could come back. Like, this is his one shot of getting to the top of this mountain. And I could come back. And even if I didn't come back, it wouldn't be a big deal.
Yeah.
Like, that was, like, the big thing. It's, like, making it there together was more important than making it at all, right?
Yeah. Right.
So I'd say that was a big one. And then also another big one was that, I don't know why, but for me, climbing mountains was easy. Like, that was easier. And again, what I mean by that is that, like, having an obvious goal, right? Like, setting your sights somewhere so that your trajectory follows where you're already pointing, right? So, like, essentially all I had to do was look at Aconcagua and then pull my bow back and fire my arrow, right? And I'm sighted in on the summit. So essentially, my arrow is going to follow the trajectory I set up. So it's deciding where you're pointing your arrow and then, following that trajectory and doing everything you have to continue that.
Yeah.
Continue the trajectory towards what you're trying to accomplish. So, and I found that is an easier approach, not only towards mountains, but also in life. It's like when you decide what you're pointing towards, the rest of a lot of those little decisions become answered for you, right? Like, yeah, when you get up high in the mountains, you don't want to eat. Like, you don't want to eat dinner. Like, even if the food's amazing, like, you don't even want to touch it because you're not hungry, you haven't been sleeping, like, you're cranky, like, all these things are coming at you, but it's like, okay, I have to eat, otherwise I'm not going to have fuel to get to the top. So, like, I would eat when I didn't want to, or I'd do things I didn't want to. Like, during the week, it was like, okay, you kind of look at yourself in the mirror and be like, okay, do you want to actually get to the top? It's like, okay, then go hiking. Throw your mask on and go move. Like, again, some of those littler questions in life become answered when you have a larger goal involved, right? So some of those questions that you may have about yourself or what you're doing every day or any of these, some of these things that are conflicting, right?
Right.
You kind of get worked up about the small stuff, but when you have something bigger, all the small stuff becomes answered, so you don't have to worry about some of the smaller things in your life, and they kind of just fall into place because you already know, where you're going.
Right.
Yeah. And I mean, just in terms of, our podcast is called Connect or Die. The whole idea being connecting with ourselves, connecting with others, connecting with God, connecting with nature. I imagine an experience like this, I mean, there are probably thousands of moments like that where you're you talked a lot about connecting with people from other countries and other backgrounds. I'm sure connecting with nature, like connecting with the forces that exist in this world that I've never been up that high to the point where oxygen is depleted. Like, I guess, I don't know, could you speak to that in any way in terms of like, how have these experiences helped you to connect more with yourself, with others, with God, with greater purpose in life? Like, if you want to go that deep, but
yeah, of course. And with connection, that's a huge thing, I think, because first thing, when you're not getting, and I kind of take a long way of saying things sometimes, but
no worries.
First thing, when you're not getting stuck on the small stuff, not only are you more connected with yourself, but then, it's connecting with essentially almost a higher purpose as well. So
Absolutely.
Like, if you, how can I say what I'm trying to say? So we'll kind of go from one step to another, right? First thing is connecting with others, right? I realized that my connection with my dad in the experience was more important than the summit to me.
Yeah.
So that connection was more important, right?
Which that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Because that's not nothing.
Powerful.
Like, the fact that you're able to be like, I spent $6,000 on this, and if I don't get to the top, like,
it's
that's
not a big deal.
The most important thing.
Yeah, it wasn't important anymore. Like, it
That's
was realizing
really cool.
that connection was more important.
And, and especially with the background, not to like, but with the background of what happened in your family, with losing your brother, and that being kind of the background of this experience, for that to be able to happen, I think is incredibly significant.
Oh yeah, of course. I definitely agree on that, and I think that that connection was more important to me. And again, and I didn't have that realization. I kept pushing, like I was trying to push everybody to go faster, especially for the first half, just because I was like, oh yeah, let's go. Like I've got energy. It's like it doesn't matter. Like I wasn't really concerned about how everybody else was feeling. I just knew that I had energy and I wanted to move, right? And that's kind of how I was feeling for a long time. And then when we got there, like I kind of looked around, I saw everybody, I saw how tired my dad was, and like just where we were at. I was like, man, like okay. It's not a big deal. Like, I was so focused on something that when I let go of that focus and focused on, I'll use your words in which the connection. So it is rather than focusing on like, the summit, which I was just holding on to so tight, I focused on that connection instead. And I think even that focus even adjusted our trajectory in even getting to the summit.
Yeah.
Right?
Totally.
Had I been holding on to the summit so tight, I think things could have gone even differently,
Yeah.
even with that switch in the middle of the hike.
Do you think that contributed to, because you talked about the presence that you had of just like one foot in front of the other,
Mm-hmm.
do you think that connection contributed to that? Being able to be present as opposed to like looking to the end and constantly thinking about the end,
True.
which probably would have made the hike longer and maybe
Yeah,
more grueling.
and then also if I was by myself, just mobbing up the trail, like,
Yeah.
you know, it wouldn't have been as fulfilling,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
essentially, it did change the hike. Like, letting go of the summit and focusing on, like, those around me was, like, a big change, and I think that literally is because I decided, I'm like, okay, I'm not going in front of my dad. Like, I'm going to hike behind him because that's important. And, you know, like, just kind of, it changed a lot of how I was doing things even for the first half of the summit hike, which was just one day there, right? That 15-hour, 16-hour
Right.
day. But, you know, that first half of the hike, just on the way up, you know, changing my mind on that and realizing that I'm going to approach it differently did change the way the whole rest of that hike went.
Right.
You know, and I think that even had I not made that switch, that the hike could have gone differently, right?
Yeah.
Maybe only I made it, and then, I mean, that would have left me feeling unfulfilled as well, right?
Yeah.
Right. Totally.
Like, I think that, like, a lot of things could have gone differently had I not changed my perspective and kind of decided on a different target rather than the summit, and I adjusted my perspective and my trajectory, which then ultimately fulfilled my goal.
Yeah, you
Right.
got there anyway.
Yeah. And now, had we not, like, I still think that it would have been okay, but what I'm
Absolutely.
saying, though, is that adjusting my trajectory was, like, I didn't realize it at the time, but it was one of the steps in accomplishing the ultimate goal in the first
Yeah.
place, right?
Right.
So it was adjusting that trajectory on what was important. Now, again, that connection was super important. And when it comes to connection with, like, nature, right, you're talking about, like, when you reach some of those summits, like, and you can just see everything, it just kind of, you just, there's too much to take in.
Yeah.
I still remember, and this was almost more striking than the summit, in my opinion, but we were up on the camp before the highest camp. I remember walking out of my tent in the middle of the night, and just like all the stars are above you. Like, it was just, the sky was full of stars, and then the moon was coming up, and then you could just see mountains, and just, it was just beautiful and crisp, you know. And it was a little cold, so like I just walked out, and I just remember standing there and just like, you just drink in these views that you're like, whoa, like, it's just so insurmountable, like it's almost incomprehensible to an
Right.
extent to just see everything, and then it's still being just a small part of everything else,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Well, even
So-
just the other day, we were climbing, we were just hiking
Grove Creek.
Grove
Yeah.
Creek, and we reached a certain point, and there was this really cool overlook, and Dave snapped a picture, and I was looking at it today, and it's just interesting to see like the size of me as a human in comparison to this mountain, and you start to feel really small, but at the same time, you begin to feel really big when you realize everything that has combined for you to be able to be there
Yeah.
Yeah.
and to be able to experience something. And you know, whether you believe in God or you believe that things happen random or whatever your belief system is, so much has happened in order for us to be here in this moment. And I just imagine, you know, views like that.
Yeah.
It's hard in those moments not to feel like that
Well-
that unity of the, I don't know, I just feel like
Yeah.
shamanistic,
Yeah.
but like of the universe and,
Well, it's
and
true
you
because
and your purpose.
you're
and
so
like,
tiny, but you're part of something so much bigger.
yes,
Right.
yeah.
Right. And that's again like that adjustment in perspective. Again, like letting go of, I guess we could even call it the material, right? The
Absolutely.
summit and this idea of like the material, right? And then focusing on that connection and that appreciation of what is really going on,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
It's even when you're talking about like all those little things that had to happen for us to even get to the summit. Like even on my perspective and the perspective of those around us and how they had to change their, like,
Yeah.
you know, and like all of their choices and how that affected how we got to the summit too, right? Even our
Right.
guides. Like, I kind of had to almost strong arm the guide because of how he was hiking. Because I'm like, you're wearing my dad out. Like, you got to cut this out. Or this is how we're going to hike. And we had to actually, like, you know what I mean? I kind of had to, like, push in different ways.
Because
Yeah.
they were
Even-
making him hike fast and then rest.
Oh.
My dad's
Yeah.
like muscles were.
Oh, yeah.
stuck.
His muscles were getting all jacked up. So, like, again, like,
So
there
you-
were all
you
these
were
little
probably, like,
things that
more
we
the
had to
consistent-
push.
The consistent,
you know?
consistent pace.
Right.
And it's, again, just gaining that appreciation and, like going through that experience and then being able to appreciate, you know, what you were a part of. And, I mean, people do that all the time, right? And I know how often I overlook, you know, what I've been a part of and then also what I'm going to be a part of, right? And, like, I find that we overlook these things when we get, you know, so caught up in the day-to-day.
Absolutely.
Now, And then again, it's just being able to realize it's like, yeah, like there was a lot that had to happen for me to even be able to stand there when I did. And then also being able to drink in the enormity, and it's realizing how small you are and how inconsequential, right? But then also realizing like that you are a piece of something larger, and that if you're willing to participate, like you can actively not only fulfill your role as being a piece of that, but then also to be able to help others, connect more as well. So that connection is super important between others.
How far do those ripples go out? I often think about that. Like I'm sure you guys have heard of like pay it forward or whatever.
Absolutely.
It's like if you do one thing right, if you inspire the right person, how far will that ripple?
Yeah.
And that's where I think that's something truly divine within us, and that's what I'm trying my best to connect to. That's a big part of the Connect or Die and kind of my story that we went over at the origins. But you doing that, you affected all of those people's lives within it. And you're talking about like all the things that brought you to the summit. That's literally happening to us today, all the time.
Yeah. With
everyone we meet. And so, and I just think that's powerful. I think that we forget it all the time. I know I do. But the greater we get at connecting and staying present and continually remembering, I feel like that's when we can make a huge impact.
Yeah, so often and the quote just comes to my mind from Thomas S. Monson.
Right.
Never let a problem to be solved become more important than a person to be loved, but it becomes so challenging because life offers so many problems. And I'm sure you had that on the mountains. Like there were probably problems all the time that had to be faced, and it was a moment to moment thing. But not allowing those problems to take us out,
right?
To take us out of the moments where we can affect not only ourselves but other people. It's it's a very challenging lesson to learn. But one way that I've learned it is with my kids, and I think you're absolutely right. I remember early on in my son Ben's life, it was like when he was very, very young, I just kept thinking, man, I can't wait until he can crawl around and like entertain himself.
Yeah.
And then he was able to crawl around and entertain himself, and I'm like, would you just freaking sit still? Like, I wish I could just grab you, and like, no, he's like wiggling, and then it's like, just sit still. Like, and so I learned early on, I couldn't look forward to like, I can't wait until he can talk. I can't wait until he can do this on his own. I just needed to stay in the moments because they pass.
So quickly. It's over.
And if you look forward to something, you're gonna miss what's right there. And I think the metaphor of a mountain, it's just beautiful because you're right. You look, the summit's right there, but the footsteps that are right in front of me that I have to take slowly for whatever reason, like it doesn't make sense, but you ultimately get where you're going, and you help other people get there, and you have these incredible experiences and these incredible views, not just at the top, but all the way.
Yeah.
And so.
Dude, that reminds me of a story, if you don't mind. I was hiking with Evelyn on my back. This just reminds me of how, like, there's people in our lives that can help us realize this. But I hike with her on my back a lot, and she's not light. She weighs a little bit, She's like almost 4 years old. But remember, I was hiking with her one time, and every time we'd come around a bend, she'd be like, "Dad, be careful, don't trip." Be careful, don't trip. And I'm like, I'm not going to trip. Why? Well, because Daddy's really strong. I'm like, that's right, Daddy's really strong, so I'm not going to trip. And it was funny because I was actually hiking Grove Creek Canyon, which I've hiked, I don't even know how many times. And I recognized a lot more of the parts of the trail that I skip over. Like, there's big parts of the trail that's like, oh, that's a cool place to look off. This would be a cool place to meditate. Like, and I got to see more.
Yeah.
And I think that the better we get at enjoying the journey, the more we get to see.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So.
And I think that's a really good point. There's 2 points I want to make. The first one is that I don't feel like I appreciated Kilimanjaro as much as I should have, right? I became impatient and frustrated. Sure, somebody stole our money, right? Yeah. So that's frustrating. Like, so I had reasons, right? So I had reasons. But had I not, like, clung to those reasons of being frustrated with those, like, around me or with, like, you know what I mean? Had I not clung to those reasons, I probably would have appreciated the experience for what it was more, right? So in retrospect, you always look, you're like, okay, like, it really wasn't as bad like, sure, like, it does suck. Like, I can recognize that. But, like, the fact is if you get worked up on it, because I was pretty worked up. My dad had found somebody else to take us up, but I was still worked up about it. Had it just been me, I wouldn't have ever found anybody to get me up there, right? He had been actively looking for something else to get us up there when I was just like, this sucks, you know? Like,
absolutely.
You know, so had I not been actively holding on to those, my frustrations, even though I had every right to be hanging on to them.
Absolutely.
Like anybody has every right to be angry about this.
Sure.
But being angry about it doesn't actually change anything. Right. So I think that I didn't appreciate it as much as I should have, and I probably focused on their flaws more than I normally would have had things been different, right? And I think that I found things that were wrong with everything rather than like enjoying what was happening, right?
Yeah.
Now, don't get me wrong, I still appreciate the experience, but that is something, you know, within that experience that altered it from my Aconcagua experience, right? Now, one thing with the Aconcagua experience, and I like what you guys were talking about in those moments, but I had something come to my mind I wanted to mention is at that summit, you know, when you're taking those small steps, you can't see the fact that there's no oxygen. There's no visible difference around you, right? So, like, there's a lot of these factors in our lives that you can't see, right?
Yeah.
You know? And when you, again, when you do get up there, you're right, you do see the enormity of everything and, you know, how small you are. And it does create a level of belief in a higher power now. And it's being able to realize that it's like, wow, someone created all of this, right? God created this, and this is kind of a big deal. Right. But then again, realizing, like, that you're just a little piece of the puzzle. But, again, it's taking those steps, getting to the summit, and then looking up and seeing that you have 100 yards or 50 yards. But then, like, it's like accepting the fact that it's going to take 30 minutes to get there and taking those small steps. Right. Or, like, being frustrated and trying to overextend yourself and then falling over out of exhaustion because, like, you can't make it. And you're like, why can't I make it? It's within my grasp. But then you're like, you know what I mean? So, like, it's the fact is that there are things happening around you that you can't see.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's being able to appreciate, you know, what's in front of you and then being able to, like, I'm just trying to say when it's getting to the summit, you know, those little steps.
Right.
I
think it's great. And this actually reminds me of my favorite line from my favorite poet.
Mm-hmm.
You already are, you always were, and you still have time to be.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think that's, like, when I heard those lines, I was like, that's true on so many levels. It really hit me.
Yeah.
So I think, like, you already are, which means, like, you're taking the small steps. You always were. You've taken the steps in the past. But you still have time to be. You still can continue to get to where you want to get.
Mm-hmm.
And if you trust the journey and take joy in it, that's the lesson.
Yeah.
It, like, the conclusion doesn't even matter that much.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Like, and that's that kind of goes back to our favorite book, Wave Kings, right?
So good.
Yeah. Journey before destination, right?
Yep.
And I think, like, that's an ever evolving principle that never ends.
Yeah. Life before death.
Yeah.
Strength before weakness. Journey before destination.
Yeah.
So, like, you know, it's like focusing on life. Like, yeah, you're gonna die. Everybody does.
Yeah.
But, like, is it worth focusing on? Was it worth holding on to that idea all the time? It's like, no, like, that's going to prevent you from living while you're here, right?
Absolutely.
And, you know, journey before destination. If all you're doing is hanging on to that destination,
you're
not going to experience that journey.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it just speaks to the point that perception really is our reality. Like, it creates our reality. If we hold on to the future, it distorts the present. If we hold on to the past, you know, like when you talk about Kilimanjaro, you're like, I couldn't let it go.
Yeah.
It absolutely impacts the present. But when we are able to live in the present, and with that, you know, stoicism, we talked about that a little bit, but being able to accurately be able to understand what's going on, the truth of the situation, we're so much more empowered.
Right.
Yeah.
So much more empowered to be able to act appropriately for ourselves with regards to the things we want. We're able to clearly see the things we want. We're able to clearly see other people and what they're going through and what they're experiencing, so we can react to it. It's just live in the moment. Like, I'm learning that so much in my life, and it's difficult because the challenges come and they draw our attention to the future, or they draw our attention to the past, but agency happens right now.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's a good place to end.
Yeah.
I think that was a great place to end.
Thanks, Joe, for being here.
Yeah,
Cool,
that was
thank you
awesome.
so much.
Of course.
That's a cool
Fascinating,
story.
Yeah.
And as always, guys, don't ever forget to connect and just tell the truth.
Yeah.
Tell
always.
the truth. Always.
Yeah. Or at least don't lie.
Or at least
least
don't
don't
lie.
lie.
Thank you, Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
Hey everybody, thank you so much for listening to our podcast, for being a part of the Connect or Die Nation. Make sure you subscribe to this page, hit that bell so you can get all notifications when we have new podcasts. In the description is all our different social media accounts. You can go and follow us there. And remember to be honest and go out there and connect.